you are actually the last quarterback that the Colts have drafted.
Yeah, someone told me that the other day. I thought that was pretty funny. I'd never realized it. But yeah, they haven't drafted anybody.
So kind of what does that mean to you? It means like they've been pretty set at the quarterback position since that 2012 draft then.
Yeah, it's definitely it's kind of surreal to think about, you know what I mean? Because it's been going on 8 years now. So it's a pretty cool feeling, to be honest, to sit back and think about it. But, you know, like you said, the Colts have been pretty set at quarterback with obviously Andrew and Matt Hasselbeck as a backup. And then, you know, they got some good play out of Jacoby Brissett and now Phillip Rivers. So it's, you know, whenever they draft the next one, I would imagine probably here soon, you know, maybe it's a developmental type guy. But nonetheless, it's pretty cool to sit back and think that I was the last one drafted.
What was that day like for you? Because I remember we had our guy Randy kind of following you around a little bit, just anticipation of when you were going to get drafted because, you know, we thought you were definitely going to get picked. And what was that day and that moment like when you got the phone call?
It was a very stressful day, honestly. For most of the day, it was not as enjoyable as what one would think. You know, I had family and friends there. We actually chose to go golfing that day. And being that it was Indiana, it was about 45 degrees, blowing rain and cold, but we went golfing anyway. Nothing happened on that draft day. That was the third day of the draft. That was Saturday. And nothing happened. And so it was becoming frustrating. And then when it did, we went back to one of my family members' homes, and we were sitting around the TV, and the phone rang. And it was the Colts. And, man, you talk about just such a surreal event, you know, that the Indianapolis Colts were calling you. You're watching it live on TV. You know, some of my family and friends were just wearing Colts stuff naturally because they're football fans and they're all Colts fans. So to get it from the Colts of all teams, you would never expect it because they did draft Andrew with that first pick. It was very surprising, but nonetheless, it was so much fun. We had a blast with it. Really exciting time. You know, the family was all there for the most part. So it was neat to be with those that have supported you all along the way.
You kind of led into the next question is, were you surprised that it was the Colts? Because you mentioned, you know, obviously they took Andrew. He was going to be the future of the franchise at the quarterback position. Were you surprised? Were there other teams that you thought maybe were more likely to select you at some point?
Yeah, you know, the way the process goes, you know, in the later rounds, you start getting phone calls from other teams. And I was getting calls from teams like the Minnesota Vikings, Kansas City, and San Diego. And they were kind of setting up a potential opportunity, whether I would be a late round draft pick for them or a seventh round draft pick or a potential free agent, like a priority free agent where you would sign right after the draft is over. And we got to the point right there at the end that it was going to be San Diego. We were going to go off to San Diego and be a backup to Phillip Rivers and learn and grow in San Diego and go from there. But then obviously the Colts called, and that was a shocker just because you would never think that they would draft two quarterbacks, although I believe the Redskins did it with RG3 and Kirk Cousins that year as well. So there was some precedent there, but yeah, it was a very exciting time, surprising time. You know, the plan was completely changed right there at the last second. So, but nonetheless, it was probably that much more fun because it was such a surprise.
You mentioned your family was wearing Colts gear. You know, you're from Indiana. I think the whole state of Indiana grew in its football love when Peyton Manning took over.
Yeah.
So when you heard you played, I guess that was the RCA then when you guys played for the state championship then.
Yeah, it was.
Home of the Colts. So just having that link and having it be your hometown team, how it would have been great to be drafted by anybody, I'm imagining, but how special was it that it was that team that you kind of saw evolve into such a big name with Manning and with what all they were able to do?
You know, it was this is kind of a surprising answer, but that was the Colts was the last team I wanted to go to because I had such an affinity for the Colts. I grew up with those Peyton Manning years, so I was, you know, naturally he was a role model of mine. You know, he didn't know me, but he was a hero. And I had posters of Reggie Wayne and Peyton Manning, Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis. I had these guys in my bedroom, and I was a huge Colts fan. And I remember telling people leading up to the draft, I'll play anywhere. I don't really want to go to Indianapolis because the added pressure, family, friends, all that kind of stuff. So when the Colts did call, Ryan Grigson, the general manager at the time, said, how do you feel about becoming an Indianapolis Colt? And I said, heck yes, let's go do this. But deep down, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I getting myself into? There was a lot of pressure, especially during times like training camp where practice is open to the public, and Bluffton is an hour away from Anderson. So you always had family and friends at practice, but ultimately, I think it was a true blessing in disguise just to be able to be close to family and friends and have that support staff so near. I was able to sneak home on Friday nights and watch Pearson play at Norwell, my little brother. So those were some cool moments that you never get back, and I would have never had I been in San Diego or Kansas City or something.
So what was your approach going into camp? Like we said, Andrew was obviously, number one pick. So in some ways, obviously having family and friends around, that pressure was on, but the pressure to be a starting quarterback or be a face of the franchise, that wasn't there. So I guess that's kind of the blessing in disguise. What was your attitude heading into camp as a rookie out of Northern Illinois?
It was a whirlwind. I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. So it was exciting. It was very stressful, very nerve-wracking, just because I knew that, it was all on the line. Your livelihood was on the line because, they're evaluating every single throw you make, every meeting you sit in, every practice, obviously. So I knew it was a very important time for me to develop, and training camp was a little bit rocky in the beginning for me. I remember I was struggling just to get the feel of the professional football life style, what was expected of you in the film room and the extra work that is needed, especially as a quarterback. But as training camp went on, I could feel that the coaches, belief in me was growing, their confidence was growing. We all knew that Andrew was the guy. So again, that was an interesting dynamic because, typically I go into a situation always fighting for that starting spot. But in a situation like this, you just know that it was closed. It was a closed deal. You weren't beating out Andrew Luck, period. So you go in there and you think to yourself, how can I prepare myself to be the best support, the best quarterback I can be, the best leader of this team? And if called on, I can act as a starter. Having known that, it was at least good because there was no confusion. There was no confusion that Andrew was the man. However, I know me and Drew Stanton at the time was the other quarterback. We still prepared as if we were going out there and we had to be ready at any moment in case Andrew were to get hurt or something like that.
So as your career progressed, obviously they kept you on the practice squad. So they liked having you around. They knew that you were a guy that, if an injury happened, could step in and make some plays for the team. So going forward in your career, what did you try to learn as a practice squad quarterback, and what did you try to learn in that first? I guess you were in camp. You were with the Colts for 2 years, and then the third year was just preseason camp, right?
Yeah. So I was released after the third preseason with the Colts, and I would say that the number one thing I learned was just being the best leader I can be in the position, the cards that I was dealt, being a backup quarterback. I always was fighting for that backup role. That was my kind of train of thought from Indianapolis on to Minnesota and even into Arizona, where I had my few stops. I wanted to number one, always fight to be that backup quarterback. But number two, I wanted to do anything extra that I could. And this was something I always respected Chuck Pagano for. He would always say, make yourself, so valuable to this team that we just cannot, cut you. We cannot release you. Make yourself so valuable. So I would try to do the little things. I would try to grab guys on off days and go and throw, pass receiving routes to maybe practice squad receivers, maybe sit down with a running back that wasn't picking up the offense. Whatever I had to do, I wanted to make myself seen. I wanted to be in the weight room extra time, in the extra film room, spending time with the coaches. Anything that you can do to make yourself that much more valuable. That was one thing I really learned from guys like Matt Hasselbeck or Drew Stanton. They were always on. They were always a great support when needed. They always knew the playbook front and back, that if there was a question, you could lean on those guys. Because as a quarterback, especially as a backup quarterback, you really are an extension of that coaching staff. Mm-hmm. And if you can have your eyes on a certain part of the field during a practice or a game, and whether it's Andrew or a coach can ask them questions, you can help them out. That's where a real good value is for a backup guy like myself.
So after that third preseason with the Colts, you got let go, and then you landed with the Vikings, and you were like thrown into the fire.
Yeah.
Because did they pick you up on like a Monday, and they had like a Thursday game, if I remember that correctly, or something like that? And you were on the active, like you hadn't been on the Colts active roster for the regular season, and then it was like, bam, the Vikings got you, and like you were the number 2 guy.
Yeah, that was a crazy scenario because I was coming home. I was actually in Chicago visiting some friends, and I was coming back to Indianapolis where I still lived, and I got a call from my agent on a Sunday night, and he says, "Hey, pack your bags. You're going to play some football." I said, "Where am I going?" He said, "You're hopping on the first flight Monday morning to Minnesota." I get to Minnesota, and by, I believe it was Tuesday morning, they had awarded me the backup position, which was kind of surprising to me because they already had another guy there. His name was Bethel McLeod Thompson, I think is his name, or Bethel Thompson McLeod, one of the two. But he was their backup at the time, and apparently within that first day, I made enough of an impression that they made me the backup quarterback for the Thursday night game at Lambeau Field, one of the most historical places in the NFL. That was a really cool experience. I still probably only knew about 50% of the offense at that time, but I was ready to go if need be, and it was a really neat experience.
So you stayed with the Vikings for, was it the rest of the season, or it was most of the rest of the season, wasn't it?
I was with the Vikings, for most of the rest of the season. I actually ended up getting hurt during a practice.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe about 6 to 8 weeks in with the Vikings. It might have been about week 14 of the season or something. And a lineman got rushed into me, and he stepped on my foot and broke my foot. So I got put on injured reserve, spent the rest of the season there, and then got picked up by the Arizona Cardinals in the offseason.
Now, what was that opportunity like? Because that would have reunited you with, like, I think both Drew Stanton and Bruce Arians, right?
That's right. Yeah. So that was another unique experience. It was cool to go live in a different part of the country because I was still kind of in the Midwest at that time. So to go down to Phoenix was a neat experience. But at the time, they had Carson Palmer, they had Drew Stanton. They still had another guy, Logan Thomas, which is now a tight end in the NFL, which is kind of interesting how that worked out for him.
Former Virginia Tech guy, I think.
Yeah, right? That's right. So they brought me into, you kind of hear some chatter behind closed doors. They brought me in to compete, to really kind of wake Logan Thomas up. And for whatever reason, it just didn't click with Logan. And he ended up getting released and turned into a tight end. But, good for him that he's still finding a way to make it. But I ended up getting released in the preseason. And after that, I actually went to Seattle. And I had a change of heart while I was out there. And I asked that they send me home. I was I knew if it got to a point where I was only playing for the money, it wasn't going to be for me anymore. I needed to have that passion to play the game. And I lost that passion. I was ready for the next phase of life, and I was in Seattle for a day, and they offered me a contract, but nothing guaranteed. Tavares Jackson, rest in peace. He actually just passed here about a week ago, but Tavares Jackson just had gotten hurt a week before, and they needed another quarterback. And unfortunately, I just, like I said, I had the change of heart, and I came home and I moved on. Haven't looked back.
Yeah. When you do look back at your career, how do you view your career? Especially, coming from a small town like Bluffton, you got a chance to play as a quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, there's so much to be proud of. Definitely very proud and excited to talk about the college career. We had a lot of fun in college. The NFL was an awesome experience. I met some great people, some friends that are still friends today, and some great mentors. And like I said, I was able to experience some things that just the normal person doesn't get to see and experience. So that was neat, but. Honestly, I probably wish I was maybe a little bit more serious, so to speak, about the NFL career. I think maybe at times you get a little comfortable. You get a little comfortable being the backup or the third string quarterback, and you have to keep that edge. And if you don't keep that edge, I remember my coach at Northern Illinois, Jerry Kill. He'd always say, "You're either getting better or you're getting worse." And I think I lost that edge at times, and I think that's why my career didn't really flourish the way I wanted it to. I always saw myself as, hey, I could do this. I believe I can do this. And if not a starter, I could definitely be a backup in this league for a long, long time. And funny thing is, I still feel that way today. I still feel I can go out there and play, but, the Lord took me down a different path, and I'm at peace with that. I really am. And sometimes it's fun to be a Monday morning quarterback and watch all the games on Sunday afternoon rather than having the stress of being there and maybe an opportunity to play. So nonetheless, it was an awesome experience, and I have no regrets. And it's fun to sit back and watch as a fan.
Were you surprised when Andrew decided to retire? I know, like whenever we talk to him, he and he's up here, he always mentions this is Chandler Harnish country. So I know I'm sure you guys probably stay in touch a little bit, or pretty good friends when you were playing.
Andrew is a good friend of mine, and I haven't seen him in a while, but I know he's at peace with his decision. But man, I was shocked. I really was, and probably like most people, probably just shocked by the timing of it all. But I know how it was. Mine was a very much lesser of a scenario. But I know what happens when you kind of just you lose the passion, and for him, injuries were really starting to play a factor, and I think he just had gotten married and a child on the way, so his priorities changed, and that's understandable because at the end of the day, we are humans, right? And these guys, do have families and futures and things like that they want to think about as well. So I was shocked, but ultimately, I'm happy for him. I'm happy that he's happy and at peace with his decision.
This is the most important question of the whole interview, but the corn stand is.
I knew it was going to
be. How does it work during the quarantine? Is that possible? Can you have robots deliver it?
Well, I know that they're hoping that obviously the stay-at-home order will be lifted. I'm not sure how much the Harnish farm wants to disclose, but I believe the ground is being worked right now. The corn's being planted. There's a plan in place, and if it's still a lockdown, then I'm sure we'll do something, maybe at our house where people can come pick it up and maybe donate it or something. But the sweet corn is still in the plan, and what it's turned into, Glenn, is it's more for the younger generation in our family now. The young kids. There's a lot of them running around. College and all those kind of things. These kids get to learn a lot, dealing with money and people and kind of running your own little business. So it's a really neat thing to see these kids grow and then, learn a little bit of a work ethic. So it's fun, and it's always fun to connect with the community. I don't do it as much as I should, but hopefully now that I'm back in Indiana this year, we'll do it a little bit more.